Howdy, folks. This is Big Sam. Welcome back to another exciting episode here at the Mosin Museum. Today, we've got something really special for you. And I know I say that a lot of times, but honestly, a lot of the time it's just true. And today's no exception. This is something that you really don't see every day. This is an original Russo-Japanese War captured Mosin-Nagant M91 rifle with a lot of original features. And in particular, we're going to be talking about one specific feature of this rifle. And if you'd like to follow along and see this full rifle in ultra high resolution, go check out the link I posted in the description where you can look at it on our website. But what are we talking about today? Well, specifically, we're talking about in my opinion, most difficult single accessory you can possibly find for the Mosin-Nagant. And while we have this whole rifle here as a whole, we're specifically talking about one very small part of this rifle. This sling swivel up here at the front. I've spent a lot of time looking at Mosins over the last several years, and I gotta tell you, this front sling swivel here is one of the most elusive varmints I've ever come across. Trying to find one of these is like, I don't know, trying to find a needle in a haystack is probably a pretty good analogy, because it's just not something you're likely ever going to come across. And first of all, I want to talk about why that is. This sling swivel was initially with the Mosin-Nagant when it was adopted in 1891. So all of the M91 pattern rifles would have this. The Dragoon and Cossack rifles, as well as later the 1907 carbine, would not. But all of the standard infantry rifles would have this feature. So these rifles started being produced in massive numbers right in the kind of the tail end of the 1890s. And so you started to see a lot of these rifles in Russian inventory. And then in the early 1900s, of course, we have the Russo-Japanese War. And, well, that didn't go so well for Russia. And there was a lot of interesting findings that came out of that war. One of the big findings was that the sling swivel system on this M91 pattern rifle was kind of terrible, because the way the sling mounts is up here on this barrel band and back here on the magazine. The magazine sling swivel wasn't quite as bad, but the sling swivel up here was real bad because it's mounted directly to the barrel band. Now, if your barrel band is a really good design, maybe that would work. But the problem is the original pattern M91 barrel bands like we have here were actually a pretty rotten design. And I think a lot of you may have experienced some of the heartache with these, is that they just tend to not hold up. Specifically the screws. They tend to just kind of work themselves out, and the way these have a tension system on them is if you're not careful, you can basically just break these and you'll lose tension, so you can't actually tighten these anymore. And a lot of people will accidentally induce this problem on barrel bands that were previously working, because these are actually left-hand threads. So to tighten them, you actually have to turn left, and to loosen them, you have to turn right. And so a lot of people get their hands on these not familiar with it, and naturally you'll tighten it too much when you think you're loosening it, and then you end up just breaking it, because it's a bad design that's well over 100 years old, so it's pretty easy to break. These didn't survive all that well in combat, especially repeated combat and heavy use. And you got the use of just slinging this thing over your shoulder and, you know, walking 10 miles a day and doing that a lot. These things just wear out really quickly. So one of the things they discovered after the Russo-Japanese War was they needed a better option. Now, one of the things that actually shined during the Russo-Japanese War was the Dragoon and Cossack pattern rifles. It seems like those fared a lot better, and I think one of the reasons is because obviously they're shorter. So, I mean, this thing is massive, especially when you add a bayonet to it that's like this long. So they were a little bit more compact, but they used a different sling mounting system, one that we're a lot more used to today. They used the same sling mounting system that the modern M9130 used. It's got a couple of scutcheons, holes in the stock, one up here, one back here, and the sling wraps through it using a pair of dog collars, and it attaches that way. That's a much better option. It's still not probably the best option, but it's far superior to something like this. All right, so long story short, around 1908, one of the first big revisions came on the M91 pattern of rifle. They actually ditched this sling system in favor of the same system that the Dragoon and Cossack rifles used in 1907 carbines, which was those escutcheons that we're very familiar with. Same ones that the 9130 bears. So pretty much all M91 rifles you're going to find have escutcheons in the stock. This one's kind of interesting because it doesn't. And those would replace it. Now, a lot of the rifles would not actually have been retroactively upgraded to this upgrade. So if rifles were made before this, because Russia is such a big place and their logistics were so incompetent back in the day, it was not really feasible to go upgrade all of the existing rifles to that pattern. And how do we know that, though? Well, one of the ways we know that is because of World War I. You see, one of my hobbies that I've grown accustomed to is looking around and really digging deep into the German use of the Mosin-Nagant rifle in World War I. And one of the things I find interesting about that is it's quite well documented, because in World War I, Germany was pretty advanced as far as countries go at that time, and photography was very, very common in Germany. So you had a lot of guys getting their pictures taken, guys in their unit having their whole unit's picture taken. Excuse me. And because of that, there's a lot of pictures of Germany using guns like this in World War I. And what we can tell is a lot of the guns they had, even though World War I was almost a decade after they implemented this change, a lot of the guns that Germany would field still use this old sling-style system. And it tells us that Russia didn't do a great job of going and upgrading all of these older rifles to that new system. Okay, we're getting to the part of why is this so hard to find now. Well, we got to understand what happened to these guns after World War I. So remember, during World War I, a lot of Mosins didn't have this, but a lot of them honestly did. Now, the ones that did, a lot of those were the older Mosins, and a lot of those were actually captured by the German Empire in World War I. And a lot of those guns ended up in Finland, either directly or indirectly, directly as war aid in this case, because Germany would send tens of thousands of these types of guns over to Finland during the Finnish Civil War in 1918, aboard several ships crossing the Baltic, I believe. And they would also get some from other various countries. In the 1920s, they would do some horse trading for other guns and ammunition to get more of these kinds of rifles. So a lot of the guns that still had this sling-style system after World War I ended up in Finland. And Finland, well, eventually, as far as we can tell, just got rid of these. We can kind of read between the lines, and it seems like Finland would basically just cut these off. It's also possible a lot of these were just broken, though, or a lot of these broke by the time the Finnish Civil War had ended. We're not really sure how many of these were intentional versus unintentional, but what we can say is leading up to the 20s and the 30s, pretty much all the Mosins in Finland's inventory didn't have the sling-style system. What we can also tell, though, is that this was not a standard sling setup that Finland would adopt. What we also see with Finnish M91s is that they would retroactively take stocks like this that didn't have the escutcheons, and they would go add the escutcheons. They would literally drill holes through the stock, add the escutcheons, and then they would use the standard dog collar system that way. So there definitely was a lot of intention, we can tell just from that Finland did not like this and did not want to use this sling-style setup. Again, we can see pictures from the Finnish Civil War where they would use rifles with this old style of slings. But then, you know, in the Winter War, there's so many pictures, and the Continuation War, we don't really see this type of sling setup. Very rarely would we see Finland using something like this in the 1930s or 1940s. I mean, that's just not really something you would see. That's not something that I have seen, at least. Not saying it never happened, but, you know, for the most part, they would standardize on the dog collar escutcheon setup, essentially, is what we're saying. So, if you wanted to find a rifle like this that still had the front sling swivel, how do you do it? That is a really good question, and there's not a good way to do it, unfortunately. I've probably seen 1 or 2 Mosins that were imported from Finland that still had this. But that's out of probably thousands that I've seen. So basically, a very small fraction of a percent of these rifles that were used by Finland still have this. Very, very, very hard to find that way. Really, the best way actually to find one of these is to either find a Mosin in its original condition that's sort of frozen in that condition before World War I started, which is what this rifle is. This rifle's sort of frozen in the year 1905, basically, when the Russo-Japanese War ended. The other way is to find a rifle frozen in time during World War I that was captured by Germany, because again, Germany had a lot of rifles in this pattern. Both of these are like kind of unicorns. You're not really likely to ever, well, find one, unfortunately. But these are kind of the main things to look for, the main types of rifles that you would find that still have the sling swivel. So again, this one's sort of frozen in time during the Russo-Japanese War, and it has the front sling swivel. And if you want to wait around till Christmas time, around Christmas time, we're actually going to be taking a look at another rifle frozen in time captured by Germany during World War I that actually has the front sling swivel too. So make sure to subscribe so you don't miss that one. That's going to be a very amazing episode. But anyway, back to this. Some of y'all also might be asking, well, Big Sam, you said that the front sling swivel is pretty hard to find, like the hardest thing to find, in fact. But what about the rear magazine sling swivel? Aren't those pretty rare? And the answer is, well, I guess it depends on your definition of rare, and I really don't want to go down that whole rabbit hole, but compared to this, no, these actually aren't that rare. Now, I wouldn't call these common, but you can certainly find them. It's actually not super uncommon to find Finnish rifles, or rifles used by Finland, that have this magazine sling swivel, but almost all of those rifles will not have the front sling swivel. So a lot of rifles may retain this rear sling swivel, but there's no sling attached to it. It'll just sort of be there flopping around and not doing anything. The sling will be attached using the escutcheon/dog collar method, which is kind of interesting. Again, it's still cool to find these. These aren't super common, but they're nowhere near as rare as these front sling swivels. And I do think part of the issue with these front sling swivels is the design. I think that they were just not very robust. I think the sling swivel itself was not robust, and I think that the barrel band it's attached to is not robust. So that's like a double whammy right there. And you know, I thought about this for a while. How robust were these front sling swivels? And it's interesting, the way I figured out that they're really not robust is by looking, again, at pictures of German use of these rifles. The more you look at these, like on the surface, you just see them and they're fine, they're there. But if you really start looking closely and paying close attention, you're going to start noticing there's a lot of problems. The more you look at pictures, the more you're going to see there's a lot of documented evidence of Germans using these guns where the sling swivels were basically already falling apart, which is really incredible. And it just goes to show it really pays to do your homework here. You really got to pay close attention. Otherwise, there's a lot of small important details that are just really easy to miss. So what we're going to do now is we're going to take you inside, and we're actually going to take a closer look at this sling swivel just so you can get a little bit better look at it. Again, this is something that pretty much I guess hardly anybody really has a chance to look at. And most people don't care, but if you're still watching this, you probably care. So you're going to now have the rare opportunity to take a close look at one of these front sling swivels. So let's do it now. All right, so here we got our rifle in question. And we can see we got our M91 Type 1 style barrel band with our Tula hammer. It's upside down, but there it is. And this is actually a really interesting swivel because it's not what I was thinking it would be. We can see it actually turns here. And it's weird because I can actually pull this up and out like that. See that? So I don't know how original it was. There's really no way to tell if this is originally how it was like, but we could definitely say that this is this correct style for a original front sling swivel. It does appear that there were several different patterns. This is actually a really different retention pattern than the other rifle that we're going to look at later near Christmas time. So if you're watching that video, or if you're watching this video and that video is already out, it'd be cool to watch this back to back so you can kind of do a compare and contrast of how similar these are. I don't see any type of like, let me get my focus here, any type of like arsenal markings on here. And I haven't seen any on the other one either. I've never actually seen any type of arsenal marking on one of these front sling swivels before. So it's kind of weird because I can just pull this off, and it's basically the way this particular rifle works. I don't know if they all work like this, but the way this particular rifle works is that the sling itself helps to retain the sling swivel, if that makes any sense. Because you can see, like, I'm actually kind of pulling, and let me get my focus back. There we go. I'm actually pulling this way on the sling, so it's kind of at max tension without really actually pulling hard. And then if I pull really hard, I can actually get the sling back on there like that. There we go. Really weird stuff. I don't know if they were all like this or if this one was sort of just like this as a repair or if this was like a thing they did for a certain amount of time. But this is really different than the one we're going to look at. But I think this is just super cool because I've never seen anything like this before on a Mosin. Now, we can look at the sling. It looks relatively old, but it doesn't look like it's old enough to actually have been original to like 1905 and seen use in the Russo-Japanese War. So it's one of the things that really confuses me. We have no way to tell how old or new this sling is. I mean, I could try to smell it for y'all. Yeah, it just smells like an old closet, basically. So, without doing any kind of CSI type analysis, which we don't really have the budget for, unfortunately, it's kind of hard to tell how old this is or where it came from, but it is really fascinating. And again, you just don't really see anything like this every day. So that's our front sling swivel for today, guys. I really hope you enjoyed taking a look at this gun. We're going to look more at this gun in the future when we take a look at our next feature. So I hope you guys are excited and enjoying the series. Let me know if you guys got any questions. You can send us an email at mosinmuseum@gmail.com, or you can go check out our website, which is mosinmuseum.com. And again, I left a link down in the description where you can go take a look at this particular Mosin in ultra high resolution. So go check it out. Let me know if you guys got any prayer requests, and we'll see you next time.